On the day of the wedding, the bride caught her fiancé doing with her father. Shocking story. Imagine the most anticipated day of your life becoming, in a matter of seconds, your biggest nightmare. An impeccable white dress, flowers everywhere, guests smiling. And, suddenly, a truth so brutal that no heart would be prepared to endure. It is at this moment, between the promise of eternal love and the complete ruin of a future, that a young woman's life changes forever. Enjoy the video and subscribe so you don't miss any details of this surprising story. It was a clear Saturday in Charleston, South Carolina. The air smelled of fresh roses and anxiety, as if each petal scattered in the ballroom corridor carried the expectation of a promising future. Emily Parker, 27, was in the room reserved for the bride, surrounded by bridesmaids who adjusted the last details of her lacy dress. The mirror reflected a woman who looked like something out of a magazine. Slightly wavy brown hair falling over her shoulders, a delicate veil, and a nervous smile that could not hide the weight of the moment. Her marriage to Michael Thompson was not only the celebration of love, but also the union of two well-known families in the region. The Parkers had a small architectural firm, respected for their tradition, while the Thompsons owned a chain of restaurants that had been thriving for decades. For the guests, that wedding represented elegance, stability, and a bright future for the couple. However, behind the curtain of perfection, Emily felt something strange. It wasn't exactly fear, but a restlessness that had been growing since the night before. Michael seemed distant, almost distracted, as if he had something stuck in his throat that he couldn't share. She tried to ignore it, believing it to be just natural nervousness of someone who was about to exchange vows in front of hundreds of people. The clock was 2:15 p.m. when Emily asked for a moment alone. He wanted to breathe, to organize his thoughts before the ceremony that would begin in a few minutes. The bridesmaids left laughing, leaving the room silent. She walked to the window and watched the guests arrive, all so elegant, smiling, taking pictures as if it were a fairy tale afternoon. It was at that moment that she heard something. Muffled laughter, male voices that seemed to echo down the side aisle. Emily frowned. That space was restricted, reserved only for close family members. Intrigued, she opened the door and walked slowly, the heels of her shoe echoing low on the carpet. The closer he got, the clearer Michael's voice became. Her heart raced. Perhaps he was talking to her father, Richard Parker, a 58-year-old man, always elegant, always concerned with maintaining the family's image of perfection. Emily took a deep breath, preparing herself for a scene of fatherly encouragement, something like, "Take good care of my daughter." But what he found was completely different. The door to the small side room was ajar. It only took one step forward for Emily to freeze. The scene before his eyes made no sense. It could not make sense. Michael was too close to Richard. The gesture, the intimacy, the touch she witnessed broke any logic of relationship between a future son-in-law and a father-in-law. They were not just words exchanged in confidence. They were intimate movements, impossible to justify. Her body was paralyzed, as if time had stopped. Her breath was short. Her throat was dry. Her eyes were unable to blink. The whole world crumbled before her, in silence. Emily took a step back, enough for the wood of the door to creak. Michael and Richard turned around at the same time, like two criminals caught in the act. The shock in their eyes was no less than hers. For a moment, the three of them stood still, trapped in a triangle of silence that carried more weight than any words could bear. Emily's mind swirled in a spiral. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just shame. It was something bigger, deeper, more devastating. The man she had chosen to share her life with, and the father who should be her trusted reference, were united in a dark secret that exploded precisely on the most important day of her life. She turned her back and ran down the hallway, her heart beating so loudly it seemed to tear through her chest. Her dress dragged on the carpet, her shoes slammed out of step, and tears smudged her impeccable makeup. He didn't know where to go. He just had to escape from that room that now looked like a trap. As she walked down the stairs, flashes of memories crossed her mind. The family dinners, The complicit glances between Michael and his father that she had never played, Michael's lame excuses when he was late, the mysterious business encounters. Each piece now fit into a puzzle she had never imagined existed. Emily walked across the main hall and out the back, taking a deep breath in the warm afternoon air. The soft music of the ceremony was already beginning to echo outside, but to her, nothing else made sense. He sat down on a stone bench in the side garden and tried to catch his breath. His heart was still racing, the taste of iron in his mouth, his hands trembling. I was on the edge between collapsing or reacting, and in that instant, a decision took shape. She wouldn't let it end her life without understanding the whole truth. He needed to find out what was behind that relationship. He needed to face the two men who, in a single afternoon, destroyed the foundation of his existence. But Emily had no idea that what she was about to discover wasn't just a personal scandal. There were secrets kept for years, hidden in papers, contracts, and discreet meetings. Secrets that linked his father and Michael in something much bigger than a forbidden relationship. And the wedding, which was supposed to mark the beginning of a new life, would become the stage for revelations that would change not only his story, but that of the entire Parker family. Emily was still sitting on the stone bench when she felt the world spin. The body trembled and the mind tried to process a flood of contradictory feelings: disgust, anger, sadness, incredulity. The white dress, which was supposed to symbolize purity and the beginning of a new life, now seemed like a burden. Each layer of fabric suffocated him as if it were a prison. She needed to pull herself together. He could not simply disappear from his own marriage without giving explanations. On the other side of the garden, you could hear the buzz of the guests. Some were already whispering, impatient for the delay of the ceremony. Emily took a deep breath, stood up, and straightened her veil. He walked back into the hall with firm steps, but each one seemed a challenge. In the hallway, Michael was standing there. His face was red, his eyes wide. Next to him, Richard was adjusting his jacket as if trying to erase a stain that was impossible to hide. The silence was unbearable. Emily stopped a few feet from the two. Her gaze, charged with fury and pain, pierced them like a blade. What was that? Her voice came out shaky, but loud enough to echo down the hallway. Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. Richard, faster, tried to take control of the situation. Emily, that's not what you think. She gave a bitter laugh. Isn't that what I think? I saw it with my own eyes. What do you want me to believe? Michael stepped forward, his voice almost a whisper. I can explain. Emily raised her hand, interrupting. No, you'll explain. Now, before I go out there in front of everyone and end this farce. Richard tried to intervene again, placing himself next to Michael as if he were his lawyer. Daughter, you are shaken. This is not the time. Don't call me daughter. Her voice cut through the air like a razor. You lost that right the moment you decided to betray me in the worst possible way. A heavy silence took over the corridor. Emily stared at both of them, but she noticed that neither of them seemed to have the courage to tell the full truth. Sweat ran down Michael's forehead, and Richard shook hands as if hiding more than he would like. You haven't been together since yesterday, Emily said, in an accusatory tone. This comes from afar. How long ago? Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. 2 years. The confession fell like a bomb. Emily put her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back her tears. 2 years meant that everything they had experienced as a couple was supported by lies. Trips, dinners, promises, all built on top of a disgusting secret. So all this time, her voice cracked. All this time you've lied to me. Michael tried to get closer, but Emily took a step back. Don't touch me. The shout rang out, and some curious bridesmaids approached the hallway. Emily quickly wiped away her tears and turned to them. Get out of here. That's between us. The young women, embarrassed, obeyed. The silence returned, but now it carried an electric voltage. Emily took a deep breath, trying to keep control. I want the truth. All of it. If you don't talk, I'll look for it myself. Richard frowned. Look for what? Do you think I'm an idiot? She snapped. This isn't just about the two of you. There is more hidden, and I'm going to find out. Richard fidgeted nervously. Michael looked at him, as if waiting for his father-in-law, or lover, to say something. But Richard remained silent. Emily took a step back and stared at the two of them. Listen well, I'm not going up to that altar. Not after what I saw. But I will not let this story die in silence either. You both owe me answers, and I'm going to rip each one out of them. She turned suddenly and walked towards the side exit. Before crossing the door, he gave a last look full of contempt. You ruined my marriage, but you won't ruin my life. Outside, the sun shone brightly, but Emily felt only cold. She took her cell phone from her purse and called her best friend, Sarah Collins. Sarah's voice, worried, answered the second call. Emily, are you okay? The ceremony should have started by now. It hasn't started and it won't start, Emily said, her voice breaking. Come and meet me behind the hall. Now. Minutes later, Sarah appeared, panting, clutching her pale blue bridesmaid dress. When he saw Emily's condition, the smudged mascara, the lost look, he understood that something terrible had happened. What's wrong? She asked, holding her friend's hands. Emily took a deep breath, stared at her, and said in a firm tone, I got Michael and my dad together. Sarah widened her eyes, unable to react. He remained silent for a few seconds, until he stammered. Together? How? The way you're thinking. Sarah put her hand to her mouth in shock. My God. Emily. Emily shook her hands. This is not just betrayal. There's something bigger about it. I feel it. I need your help to find out. Sarah hesitated, but nodded. I'm with you. Always. And in that instant, Emily knew she wouldn't face this battle alone. But he also knew that the deeper he dug, the dirtier and more dangerous the truth could be. The marriage was destroyed. But her life, from that moment on, would be moved by a single certainty. Nothing would be hidden anymore. Sarah remained silent for a few minutes, just holding Emily's hand tightly, as if she was trying to transfer stability to her friend. Shock was still stamped in his eyes, but the instinct to protect Emily spoke louder than any reaction of disbelief. Emily breathed fast, the heavy breathing of someone on the verge of collapse, but she tried to hold on to her feet. The white dress contrasted with the pain on her face. The smudged makeup couldn't hide the steady gaze, the one that showed that, despite being destroyed, she was determined to move on. I don't know where to start, Sarah, Emily said, her voice breaking. But I need answers. I can't live with this image in my head without understanding what's behind it. Sarah nodded. So let's start with what you already know. She spoke in a practical tone, as if she was already helping to build a plan. You saw the two of them together. Michael confessed that this has been happening for 2 years. This means that they had to meet many times. Where? How? Does anyone else know? Emily clutched the veil in her hands, nervously. I remember, she began, hesitantly. A few times when Michael said he needed to meet with my father to discuss investments. It always sounded strange, because my father was not one to share financial decisions with me or Mom. But I never questioned it. Sarah frowned. And your mother? Emily felt a tightness in her chest. Mom was never one to meddle in Dad's business. She always said that he had his own businesses. But now I wonder, did she never notice anything? The memory of her mother, sitting quietly during family dinners, suddenly took on another weight. What once seemed just discretion could now be fear or veiled complicity. Sarah crossed her arms. What if it's not just about their relationship? Emily stared at her, intrigued. What do you mean? Think. A man like his father, respected, owner of a solid company, and Michael, heir to a chain of restaurants worth millions. 2 years of secret meetings. Do you think this was just a case? Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The idea that there was something darker behind that relationship took his breath away. So, do you think they are hiding dirty deals? I think we need to consider all possibilities, Sarah replied firmly. Emily ran her hand over her face, trying to compose herself. I can't face this alone. Sarah held her hands again. You're not alone. I'll go with you to the end. At that moment, the side door suddenly opened. Michael appeared, panting, his face desperate. He approached, ignoring Sarah, and tried to reach Emily. Emily, please listen to me. She took 2 steps back, raising her hand. Don't come near me. Michael stopped, visibly shaken. I know it sounds unforgivable, but you need to understand. It is not simple. Emily stared at him angrily. Isn't it simple? You destroyed our marriage, Michael. 2 years of lying. 2 years of pretending love while hiding. Her voice cracked. I hid it with my father. Michael closed his eyes, as if swallowed by his own guilt. I never wanted you to find out like that. Sarah intervened, not hiding her contempt. And which way did you want it then? Hiding forever? Michael did not answer. He just looked at Emily, desperate. There are things you don't know, things that can hurt you more than this scene. Emily narrowed her eyes. Then speak. Now. He hesitated. He looked around, making sure no one else was around. Your father. He's not the man you think he is. Emily felt a lump in her throat. What do you mean? Michael took a deep breath, but before he could continue, Richard's deep voice echoed behind him. That's enough, Michael. Emily and Sarah turned around. Richard was standing a few feet away, serious, but with a menacing look. He approached slowly, each step charged with authority. That ends here. His voice sounded like an order. Emily felt her blood boil. Do you finish here? You destroyed my marriage, my trust, my family, and you just want to shut it down? Richard kept his stance firm. Some things need to remain silent for the good of all. Sarah stepped forward, indignant. This is emotional blackmail. You can't ask her to carry a secret like that, as if nothing happened. Richard cast an icy glance at Sarah. That's none of your business. Emily took a deep breath, feeling like she was on edge. It's her business, yes. Because I'm going to need someone by my side when this whole charade comes to light. Richard narrowed his eyes, but Emily didn't back down. I'll find out the truth, she said firmly. It doesn't matter how hard you try to hide it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard seemed to mince words, and Michael nervously looked from one to the other, as if he were caught between two opposing forces. Finally, Richard spoke in a low but cutting voice. Be careful, Emily. Some truths destroy more than they build. Emily felt her stomach turn, but she kept her gaze steady. Then let him destroy. But I will not live in a lie. She pulled Sarah by the arm and walked away, decisive. As she crossed the garden, a single certainty pulsed within her. This was not just a secret of betrayal. There was something much bigger, and she was willing to risk everything to find out. What Emily didn't know yet is that the first clues would appear much sooner than she imagined. Emily and Sarah walked away from the main hall, crossing the back of the garden until they reached the side parking lot. At every turn, Emily felt as if she were abandoning not only her marriage, but also the life she had built up to that point. The veil swayed in the warm afternoon wind, and the dress, already marked with dust on the hem, seemed to carry the full weight of what had just happened. Sarah opened the door of her car, an old silver sedan, and helped Emily in. Sitting in the passenger seat, Emily took off her veil with a sudden gesture and threw it on her lap. He was silent for a few seconds, staring into space, until the tears finally overflowed. 2 years, Sarah, she murmured, almost voiceless. 2 years of lies. I thought I knew Michael. I thought I knew my father. Sarah started the car, but didn't start right away. She held her friend's hand and spoke in a firm tone. You're going to get through this, Emily. It is not the end. But if you really want to find out what they're hiding, you need to be prepared to hear things that might hurt you even more. Emily wiped away her tears and nodded. I know, but I can't live in the shadows. The car slowly left through the side gate, away from the eyes of the guests who were still waiting for the start of a ceremony that would never happen. As she drove through the tree-lined streets of the area, Sarah broke her silence. What are you going to do now? Emily took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts. I need to start with what I have most concrete. The business meetings between Michael and my father. If there really was something beyond their relationship, there must be records. Sarah nodded. Do you have access to your father's company? I do. Emily replied immediately. I work there as an architect. I can enter without arousing suspicion. A determined gleam appeared in her eyes, momentarily erasing the dejection. I'm going to check the Parker and Associates files. Maybe you'll find documents, contracts, something that proves that they were hiding more than I imagine. Sarah gave him a worried look. What if what you find is worse than you think? Emily swallowed. Then at least I'll have the truth. The next morning, Emily woke up early. He had spent the night at Sarah's house, since he couldn't bear the thought of returning to his parents' mansion. Her wedding dress was lying on a chair, like a ghost that reminded her of everything she had lost. He took a long shower, put on a simple outfit, jeans and a white shirt, and tied his hair in a hurried bun. Sarah wished her strength before leaving for work, but promised to meet with her in the evening to talk. Emily then drove herself to the Parker and Associates office. It was Sunday, the building was closed, but Emily had the key. He walked through the empty hall, illuminated. Strange to be there alone, in that space that had always been forbidden to her. The huge table was impeccably organized, as always. Folders lined up, computer turned off, a small crystal tray with expensive pens. Emily sat down in the leather armchair and took a deep breath before turning on the computer. The heart raced when the home screen appeared. There was no password. His father had always relied too much on his own ability to keep secrets hidden. He began to explore the folders. At first, everything seemed normal. Architectural projects, contracts with clients, construction reports. But the more he searched, the more he noticed the presence of strange documents. Folders titled with acronyms that didn't make sense, duplicate files, and an entire section marked only as private. It clicked there. The screen was filled with financial reports, but not architecture. They were documents linked to the Thompson restaurant chain. Emily frowned. Why was Michael's family business stored on his father's computer? He opened one of the files. The lines of numbers and transactions were not easy to understand, but there was something glaring. Large amounts of money transferred to offshore accounts, all linked to shell companies. And in several of these movements, Michael's signature appeared. Emily put her hand to her mouth in shock. My God! The revelation was clear. Michael and Richard were involved in some kind of illegal financial scheme. Their intimate relationship could be a devastating secret, but now she realized it was only the surface of something even darker. As he flipped through other printed reports in a drawer, he found consulting contracts signed between Parker and Associates and Thompson Family Restaurants. Inflated values, without any plausible justification. It was money laundering. Her heart raced. Emily understood at that moment. Marriage was not just a romance. It was a business. A link that united two families around a scheme that probably had been going on for years. Suddenly, a noise behind her made her freeze. The door to the office was violently opened. What are you doing here? Richard's voice echoed through the space. He was standing at the entrance, his face charged with fury. Emily jumped to her feet, holding a briefcase in her hands. I knew it. He shouted. It wasn't just about you and Michael. You are involved in something much bigger. Richard advanced to the table, his eyes sparkling. You have no idea what you're saying. Emily held up her briefcase, as if it were a shield. I saw the contracts. I saw the transfers. You are laundering money through the company. For a moment, Richard was silent. Then he took a deep breath, trying to regain control. You don't understand, Emily. Everything I did was to protect this family. Emily chuckled. Protect? You destroyed my life, Dad. Richard moved even closer, his voice now low, almost pleading. Listen, daughter. If you open your mouth about it, it's not just going to destroy me and Michael. It will destroy us all. Your mother, your siblings, even you. Emily felt her stomach turn. So you'd rather live in lies, carrying dirt after dirt? I'd rather survive, he replied coldly. Emily stared at him, her heart heavy. I'm not going to be complicit in that. And in that moment, he knew that he had just declared war on his own father. Emily left the office with the briefcase against her chest, as if it were a safe carrying dynamite. Her father's gaze followed her to the hallway, cold, threatening, but charged with a certain despair that she had never seen in Richard Parker. For the first time, Emily realized that this man, always so assured, always so imposing, was afraid. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows of the building when she arrived at the parking lot. His hands trembled as he opened the car. He sat on the bench, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. He needed to think calmly. He had evidence in hand, but he did not know how far the scope of that scheme went. He started the car and drove aimlessly for a few minutes, until he parked in front of a discreet coffee shop downtown. He ordered a black coffee, sat in a corner away, and spread the paperwork on the table. The amount of numbers, dates, and signatures was suffocating. Michael's name appeared on almost every document, but he was not alone. Among the signatures, one caught his eye: Thomas Reynolds. Emily widened her eyes. Thomas was one of Parker and Associates' longest-serving partners, almost like an uncle to it. Always present at family dinners, always affectionate. It was impossible to imagine that he could be involved. Emily's heart raced. That was bigger than he imagined. It wasn't just Michael and his father. There was an entire network supporting that scheme. My God, he murmured, running his hands through his hair. While he was still processing the discovery, the cell phone vibrated on the table. It was Sarah. Emily, where are you? I can't say much right now. I'm looking at some documents. You've been missing all day. I'm worried. Do you want me to go there? Emily hesitated. Sarah had always been his safe haven, but a doubt crossed her mind like a bolt of lightning. How far could she trust anyone? If Thomas was involved, if even his own father showed himself to be someone else, who guaranteed that more people close to him were not part of this game? No, Sarah. I'll go to your house later. I just need to solve a few things first. Her friend agreed, but the concern in her voice was evident. Emily hung up, put away the paperwork, and paid for the coffee. Outside, the night wind was beginning to blow. He drove to Sarah's house, but before knocking on the door, he stood in the car for a few minutes, thinking. When she finally entered, Sarah welcomed her with open arms. Emily collapsed on the couch and told her everything she had found: the overseas bills, the fake contracts, Thomas's signature. Sarah listened in silence, until she shook her head in disbelief. This is much bigger than we imagined, Emily. I know, Emily replied, exhausted. But I can't just ignore it. Sarah stood up, pacing back and forth in the room. But you can't go to the police like that either, without anything organized. They will deny it, they will distort it, and you will be the one who will look crazy. Emily agreed. I need solid evidence. I need someone to help me understand these documents. Sarah stopped and stared at her. What if we look for someone from outside? A journalist, perhaps? The idea seemed risky, but it made sense. Do you know anyone? Emily asked. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. There's Mark Sullivan. He works at the Charleston Gazette. He is known for exposing local corruption scandals. If anyone can help interpret these documents, it's him. Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Then let's talk to him. The next morning, they arranged a low-key meeting with Mark at a neighborhood coffee shop. He was a man in his 40s, unshaven and with a watchful eye, accustomed to sniffing out secrets. He listened to Emily calmly, without interrupting, as she showed part of the documents. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. That's no small thing, Miss Parker. If what you brought here is confirmed, we are talking about a money laundering scheme that may involve more people than you think. Emily swallowed. So you believe me? Mark nodded. I believe, but believing is not enough. I need incontrovertible proof. And from what I'm seeing, this folder is just the tip of the iceberg. Emily bit her lower lip. And what should I do? Mark looked around, making sure no one was listening. Then he spoke in a low tone. Keep pretending you don't know anything. Go back to the company, dig through the files, the emails, anything. But be discreet. If they are suspicious, you may be in danger. Sarah held Emily's hand, alarmed. That's serious, Emily. You may be getting into something very dangerous. Emily took a deep breath. I'm already in the middle of this, Sarah. There is no going back. Mark wrote down her contact and arranged to meet again in a few days. When he said goodbye, Emily felt an even greater weight. Now he had confirmation that the hole was deep, but he also had a clear direction. He needed to continue investigating. That night, when she arrived at Sarah's house, Emily noticed something strange. An envelope was tucked under the door. He took it carefully and opened it. Inside, there was only a sheet with a sentence written in capital letters. Stop now, or you'll regret it. Emily felt her body freeze. Sarah read over her shoulder and turned pale. Emily, someone already knows that you are looking for answers. Emily squeezed the paper between her fingers, her heart racing. So that means I'm close to the truth. But deep down, I knew it also meant something else. Danger was getting closer and closer. After the brutal impact that the scene caused, silence took over the mansion. Meredith, the bride, was still lying in bed, her eyes swollen and red with tears, when she heard the door slam lightly. It was his sister, Abigail. She had traveled from Boston just for the wedding, and now she found her sister broken, plunged into a maelstrom that no one could have predicted. Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, took hold of her sister's hand, and said nothing for a few minutes. He just stood there, breathing with her, waiting for the right moment. Meredith, unable to contain herself, vented, "Abby, I saw something I shouldn't. I don't know if I have the strength to deal with it." The sister did not ask what. He did not force the truth. He just said, "You don't need to tell me now, but you need to get up. You need to decide what you are going to do with your life from today on." Those words echoed in Meredith's head. Lift. Decide. Two things that seemed impossible at that moment. Meanwhile, downstairs, the house was buzzing with murmurs. Part of the family already knew that something serious had happened, but no one was sure what. They only saw the bridegroom, Christopher, locked in one of the guest rooms, completely disfigured with shame, and the bride's father, Robert, sitting in the study, his hands on his face, muttering rambling sentences as if searching for a thread of logic in the midst of the disaster. In the midst of all this tension, a person arrived at the house who could change the course of the situation. Margaret, the mother of the bride and Robert's wife. She had left early to resolve pending issues with the decoration of the dinner, without imagining that, when she returned, she would find the family completely shattered. Margaret was not just any woman. With a strong presence, known in the neighborhood for her rigidity and firm posture, she had always been the anchor of the family. Her gaze, when she noticed the atmosphere, went straight to Robert. She entered the office and closed the door behind her. "What did you do?" he asked, in a low tone, almost whispered, but so charged with fury that Robert felt the weight in every syllable. Robert stuttered, tried to find words, but there was none that could soften it. Margaret didn't need to hear any details. His silence, his embarrassed expression, the chaos around. Everything already spoke for itself. It was then that she made a decision that no one expected. He left the office and went up to his daughter's room. When he entered, he found Meredith and Abigail embracing. Margaret took a deep breath, swallowed her own pain, and said, "Meredith, you don't have to carry this alone. I know that what he saw is unacceptable. But I want you to know that if you decide to cancel everything, if you decide to disappear, if you decide to scream to the world, I'll be on your side." These words had a devastating and, at the same time, liberating effect. For the first time, Meredith felt she had a support network. It wasn't just her against the world. Meanwhile, outside, the guests were already beginning to realize that something very wrong had happened. The pastor who was going to perform the ceremony paced back and forth, trying to understand why the bride didn't show up. The photographer whispered to the team, and the more curious neighbors began to invent their own versions of what was happening. And in the midst of this chaos, a new tension arose. Christopher, the groom, left the guest room and demanded to speak with Meredith. He was pale, trembling, his eyes fixed on the stairs that led to the bride's room. Margaret, firmly, stood before him and said, "You're not going to go up." But Christopher, with a choked voice, replied, "I need to talk to her. It's the last time." Silence took over the hallway. Margaret looked at her daughter, who was standing at the door of the room, and asked only with her gaze whether or not she wanted to hear what he had to say. Meredith, after a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, nodded. They entered the room, just the two of them. Christopher closed the door behind him, and before Meredith even said anything, he began. "You don't understand. What happened there was not what it seemed." Those words, thrown into the air, further ignited Meredith's already confused mind. If it wasn't what it seemed, then what was it? Christopher took a deep breath, ran his hands over his face, and said something that would make room for the coming twist. "Your father blackmailed me." And so that moment ended. In the hall decorated with white and gold flowers, one could still feel the weight of everything that had happened in those days. The truth, hitherto shrouded in shadows and whispers, was about to reveal itself in full. The moment of the turnaround was approaching, and everyone's breath seemed suspended, as if time itself had withdrawn to watch the outcome of a story that no one would ever have the courage to invent. Emily had spent the last few days battling doubt and fear. The image she had seen in the room, the groom and his father, engaged in an intimate gesture, did not let her sleep. His mind had tried to explain it in every way, an illusion, a misunderstanding, even a trick of the light. But Jonathan's strange looks, heavy silences, and restlessness only confirmed that there was something bigger, hidden. On the morning of the wedding, as guests began to settle into the pews of St. Mary's Church in Charleston, the entire city seemed to be watching every detail. Families mingled, exchanging greetings, while the murmur of soft voices filled the lily-scented air. Jonathan was at the altar, his hands trembling, unable to keep his gaze steady. Emily's father, Richard, looked more haggard than ever, his face stiff but his eyes filled with something that mixed shame and pain. Emily, behind the door that led to the central nave, with the veil over her face, took a deep breath. It was now. As the wedding march began, she took her first steps, feeling every gaze turn back to her. But Emily didn't look at the guests. His gaze was fixed only on Jonathan and, behind him, on his father. Every step he took seemed to drag invisible chains, carrying the weight of what he knew. Arriving at the altar, Jonathan reached out to her. Emily hesitated, watching his expression, a mixture of panic and pleading. Then, before the priest could begin the ceremony, she let go of the groom's hand and stepped back. The hall plunged into silence. Before we continue, Emily's voice trembled, but it held firm. I need to say something. The guests looked at each other, restless. The priest looked at her, confused. Jonathan lowered his head, already guessing what was coming. On the day we were supposed to rehearse for this wedding, I found something I should never have seen. Something that made me question everything I've experienced so far. A murmur ran through the hall, like a wind blowing through the ancient walls of the church. I saw my fiancé with my father. The words echoed like thunder. The silence became absolute, followed by stifled sighs and low exclamations. Emily took a deep breath, her heart racing, but she didn't back down. Jonathan looked up, the tears already forming an intense glow. Richard, next to him, clenched his fists and kept his head down, unable to face anyone. And I won't let this truth be buried on the most important day of my life, Emily added, her voice firm but choked with emotion. The guests stood motionless, some raising their hands to their mouths in shock. Jonathan finally stepped forward. His face was pale, but there was a decision in his eyes that he had not shown until then. Emily is right. His voice came out hoarse. And it's time for me to tell you everything. Their gazes turned to him, as if they expected the confession to come with a knife cut. Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to keep control of his own voice. What happened? It was not an act of betrayal, nor of forbidden love. It was a time of weakness, confusion, and despair. Me and Richard. He stopped, looking quickly at the man who would be his father-in-law. We find ourselves in circumstances that have gotten out of control. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. But Jonathan did not back down. I didn't love Richard. I never loved. What happened? It was the result of blackmail, manipulation, and something I didn't know how to escape. An even greater murmur took over the church. Emily widened her eyes in surprise. Blackmail? Jonathan stared at her, and in his eyes there was a raw pain, but also the truth that finally emerged. I was being pressured, he continued, to hide secrets that were not mine. Secrets that could destroy not only me, but also your family. Eyes now turned to Richard. Emily's father was motionless, but sweat was sliding down his forehead. His silence spoke louder than any defense. Emily, standing at the altar, felt her legs tremble. The truth was opening up before her, but in a way she could never have imagined. That was not just an intimate scandal. It was a web of secrets, lies, and manipulations that involved not only Jonathan, but also his own father. And at that moment, in front of everyone, she realized the real betrayal was not the groom's. It was the man she had trusted the most in her entire life. The turnaround had finally arrived. She couldn't sleep that night. The image of what he had seen in church repeated itself like a movie without pause. Jennifer felt a mixture of nausea and anger, but most of all, an almost obsessive need to find out what was really behind it all. It wasn't enough to just feel betrayed. She needed to understand why. The next morning, she got up early, even before the sun rose. He sat on the edge of the bed with his phone in his hand, staring at the dark screen, until he decided to call his mother, Elizabeth. The mother answered sleepily, but when she heard her daughter's tone, she woke up immediately. Jennifer didn't tell the details of what she had seen, but said that there was something very wrong between David and Michael and that she needed help investigating. Elizabeth, who had always been suspicious of Michael's exaggerated control over her daughter's life, agreed to help without question. They met in a low-key cafe in the old town. Elizabeth arrived with a folder of documents under her arm, as if she expected something serious to happen. Over coffee, the mother confessed that she had kept copies of old contracts and records from one of Michael's companies, Hinder's, passed before his eyes, until some names began to repeat themselves: shell companies, transfers in large amounts, contracts signed on the same day. Everything pointed to a corruption scheme within his father's own company. Jennifer's mind began to connect the dots. Perhaps what she had seen in the sacristy was not just a betrayal or a misinterpreted intimate situation. Perhaps it was something much bigger, something that involved blackmail, power, and money. But the doubt still corroded inside. What if she was just trying to make sense of something that had no explanation? What if it really was what it seemed like? Something intimate, something unacceptable between the groom and his own father. In order not to go crazy with her own assumptions, Jennifer decided to look for someone inside the company, someone who could confirm whether David and Michael had a professional involvement that crossed the line. That's when she remembered Rachel Moore, an old college classmate who now worked as an administrative assistant at Henderson and Company. Jennifer met her at lunchtime at a restaurant near the office. Rachel looked nervous, as if she already knew the reason for the meeting. After a few minutes of cursory conversation, Jennifer was blunt. She wanted to know if there was anything strange going on inside her father's company. Rachel took a deep breath, looked around, and said in a low voice, "I can't say much, but what you saw, Jennifer, wasn't just what it seemed. Her fiancé and father are linked by something that could destroy not only her family, but the entire company." Those words were like a punch in Jennifer's stomach. She tried to insist, but Rachel got up in a hurry, apologizing and walking away, as if she was afraid of being seen. Alone at the table, Jennifer felt more lost than ever. There were no answers, only bigger and bigger questions. That night, when she returned home, she found David sitting on the porch, still in his suit, as if he had spent the whole day in meetings. He looked tired, haggard, but his eyes searched hers with an almost desperate urgency. "Jennifer," he began, his voice hoarse, "I know you don't understand yet, but I need you to trust me just a little longer. I can't tell you everything yet, but I swear I'll explain it to you. What happened in the church was not what you imagine." She crossed her arms, keeping a cold distance. "Then explain it to me, David, because everything I see points to one lie after another." He shook his head, taking a deep breath. "Not yet. I need to protect you." That last sentence was the last straw. Jennifer got up without saying anything and entered the house, leaving David alone on the porch. But despite the anger, something inside her couldn't ignore those words. "I need to protect you." The feeling that there was a hidden truth, greater than she could imagine, only increased. Jennifer knew she was getting closer to the answer, but she also felt that each step put her more at risk. And what she didn't know yet was that the turnaround was much closer than he imagined. The next morning was one of the most tense of Emma's life. She had slept almost nothing, reliving the wedding scene over and over again in her mind. Daniel's face, surprised and embarrassed. Robert's, furious and at the same time trying to control the narrative. and hers, completely ruined, unable to understand how her life had fallen apart in seconds. But now, after Daniel's confession the night before, things were clearer. Still painful, but clear. She understood that there was something much bigger going on there. Something that involved manipulation, blackmail, and the greed of a man who had always had everything in his hands. Robert. Emma got up early, took a quick shower, and took a deep breath before heading to the kitchen. There he found his mother, Carol, already sitting, with a cup of coffee in her hands. Her face was downcast, but her eyes were steady. "You don't look like you slept," Carol said. "I couldn't," Emma replied. "I have the feeling that nothing will ever be the same again." Carol nodded slowly. "It won't, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Sometimes, we have to go through the fire to find the truth." The phrase echoed in Emma's mind, as if it were an omen of what was yet to come. Shortly after, Daniel arrived. He looked even more exhausted, but determined. He had a leather briefcase with him, and when he put it on the table, Emma realized that he had come prepared. "I thought a lot during the night," he said. "I can't let my father continue to manipulate our lives. I can't allow you to be destroyed because of his greed." Emma crossed her arms, trying to hold back her emotions. "And what do you intend to do?" Daniel opened the briefcase and spread some documents on the table. Evidence, accounting records, transfers of values that make no sense, emails I was able to recover. My father is involved in things that can take not only him, but many people with him. Emma looked at those papers and felt her heart racing. "You're saying he used all that against you? Against us?" "Exactly. He has always maintained absolute control over everything and everyone. The wedding was just another piece on his board. Maybe he thought that by marrying you, I would have a way to unite businesses, to strengthen alliances. But when he realized that I didn't want to follow his path, he began to use everything he could against me, including that moment you saw." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, swallowing. The scene still tormented her, but now it made sense within Robert's web of manipulation. "And you? What do you expect me to do with all this?" she asked, opening her eyes and staring Daniel directly. He hesitated for a moment, but then spoke firmly. "I want you to help me expose the truth, not only about what happened between us that day, but about everything my father is hiding." Silence took over the room. The sound of the clock on the wall marked the seconds like a countdown. Emma took a deep breath and replied, "If we do that, there will be no turning back. Your family will be destroyed. Your father will lose everything. He has already destroyed my life once," Daniel said firmly. "I won't let you do the same with yours." His words hit her like a punch in the chest. For the first time since the nightmare of marriage, Emma felt there was a way out. Painful, risky, but real. However, before they could make any decisions, the door was suddenly opened. Robert was standing on the doorframe, his face cold and a sharp stare. "So that's how it is," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper laden with poison. 3 against 1. Plotting against me under my own roof." Emma shuddered, but Daniel stood up immediately. "Dad, it's over. I will no longer obey your rules." Robert laughed, a short, bitter laugh. "Do you think you have a choice, Daniel? I still control everything. No matter what you do, no one will believe a word from you." "Make no mistake," Carol said, standing up as well. "The world may believe your lies for a while, but the truth always finds a way to come out." Robert gave her a look of contempt, but Emma noticed something different about him. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. He feared, in fact, losing control. And it was at that moment that Emma realized they had something powerful in their hands. Robert's empire was not as solid as he wanted to make it seem. "We don't need everyone to believe us," Emma said, her voice firm, surprising even herself. "We just need the right people." Silence fell over the room again. Robert's gaze hardened, but his fingers pattered lightly against the door, betraying the tension he was trying to hide. And in that instant, Emma understood. His power was about to collapse. The turnaround was finally happening. The silence that filled the dining room was heavier than any word spoken that night. Olivia, with her wedding dress now completely crumpled and the flowers already withered in her hand, breathed hard. The heart seemed to want to jump out of the chest. In front of her, Jonathan stood, stiff as if his whole body was locked, his eyes teary, but unable to move. His father, Richard, sat with his head in his hands, huddled like a shadow of himself. Everything that had been built up to that day, the plans, the rehearsals, the prepared vows, seemed to have turned to dust at that revelation. There was no way to pretend anymore. There was no longer any way to push the truth under the rug. Now everyone had to deal with the consequences. Olivia was the first to break the silence. Her voice came out choked but firm. "I can't live like this, Jonathan. I can't marry someone who keeps that kind of secret. I deserve to have known earlier." He tried to speak, but couldn't. Her throat froze, as if any words were going to melt into tears before reaching her lips. It was Richard who, with effort, raised his head and murmured, I blew it. I should have told you before. I should have assumed it. Jonathan is not to blame for having become attached to me, Olivia. I was the one who let this confusion grow." But Olivia didn't want to hear justifications anymore. Not at that time. All he wanted was to regain control of his own life, to understand at what point the story had gone out of the way. She stood up slowly, leaning on her chair as if her legs had no strength. He looked at Jonathan with teary eyes and said, in a whisper, "I loved you, Jonathan. I believed in us. But now I can only see a wall between us. And that wall has the face of your father." He left without looking back. That night, Jonathan didn't sleep. He spent hours pacing back and forth, trying to stitch together in his mind the broken pieces of his own story. Richard, on the other side of the house, remained locked in his study, drinking more than he should, muttering words that only he understood. The house, so imposing, seemed to have turned into a prison where every wall echoed an untold secret. In the following days, the news spread through the small town. The canceled wedding became a corner, cafe, and supermarket topic. People spoke softly, but they spoke. Olivia, in turn, took refuge in her mother's house, trying to reorganize her life. The shock was still great, but little by little she realized something important. That breakup, as painful as it was, might have been a liberation. Perhaps he would have avoided an even more chaotic and confusing future. Jonathan decided to look for Olivia after a week. Not to try to resume the engagement, but to give her something she deserved, the naked truth. They met in a small city park, where they used to walk in the first months of dating. The wooden bench where they sat had fond memories, but now it felt cold. "Olivia," he began, taking a deep breath, "I need you to know that there was never anything physical between me and my father. What you saw that morning was a confusing moment, but it wasn't what it seemed. I was torn between my love for you and the weight of the relationship I've had with him all my life. I let this emotional dependence take a space that it should never have taken." Olivia looked him in the eye and realized there was sincerity there. But he also realized something else. Jonathan wasn't ready. He carried wounds that had not yet been treated, ties that needed to be broken or rebuilt, but not in the middle of a marriage. She held his hand for a moment, as if saying goodbye for good. "I believe in you, Jonathan. But I also believe in myself, and I can no longer go down that path. I need to choose myself now." Jonathan nodded, tears finally flowing. There was nothing more to say. Over time, Olivia managed to pull herself together. He went back to work, met old friends, began to design new life plans. She discovered in herself a strength that she did not know existed, and understood that loving someone does not mean losing herself. Jonathan, in turn, began a long journey of therapy. He needed to understand his limits, the suffocating relationship with his father, and the emptiness that led him to seek approval in such crooked ways. Richard, after months of silence, ended up selling the company and moving to another city. For the first time, she let her son breathe away from her shadow. Time passed, and each one went their own way. A year later, Olivia, in a downtown cafe, met Jonathan by chance. He was different, lighter, more mature. They talked for a few minutes, remembered good things, and, when they said goodbye, she realized that there was no more pain, only peace. The story that began with an interrupted marriage finally ended with each one finding their own freedom. And in that instant, Olivia understood. Sometimes, The greatest gift life can give is the chance to start over without carrying the weight of others' secrets.